Welcome to Crash Concepts, where the economy, energy, and the environment are explored. Up next, fresh ideas and insights into the factors that are driving the world and shaping your future. Presenting information you can't afford to live without, here's Chris Martenson.
Welcome to this Peak Prosperity Podcast. I am your host, Chris Martenson. May 2015 was the wettest on record for Texas and Oklahoma. That's on record. California is experiencing the worst drought in 1,200 years. And it's so hot in India that the roads are melting. And of course, the world has always experienced strange weather events. But today it seems that new records for weather-related anomalies are piling up faster than ever, exactly as climate change scientists have warned would happen. Okay, so perhaps we adaptable humans can find ways to cope with these new strange weather events, but how does one cope with a 40% loss of oceanic phytoplankton over the past 50 years, or the increasing ocean acidification that is already corroding larval oyster shells, and who knows what else, and is predicted to become so acidic that many forms of ocean life may not be able to survive at all in the coming decades? Is there any way to out-clever these facts and trends? Now, our longest-running thread at Peak Prosperity, by far, is the one on climate change, moderated by Mark Cochran, and its longevity, rigor, depth, and civility show that this is an important topic that we can discuss like rational, prudent adults. But perhaps we're an odd lot that way. Speaking with us today is a man who has been at the front lines of the battle to raise awareness and spur action on the topic of climate change for many, many years. Both leading and participating in increasingly direct actions is Bill McKibben, noted author, environmentalist, and activist. In 1988, he wrote The End of Nature, the first book for a common audience about global warming. He is co-founder of and senior advisor at 350.org, an international climate campaign that works in 188 countries around the world. He is very much a leading figure in the climate change movement. Bill, thank you so much for joining us today.
Chris, what a pleasure.
Well, let's start with the data. What are a few of the major pieces of supporting data that stand out for you that we have on climate change today that we didn't have in 1988?
Well, look, in the late 80s when I wrote the first book about all of this, we knew trouble was coming. I mean, the basic science is not that difficult. The molecular structure of CO2 traps heat that would otherwise radiate back out to space. What we didn't know was how fast that trouble was coming, or really on what scale. And unfortunately, in the quarter century since, what we've learned is that this is pinching harder and faster than we would have thought. So, to answer your question, 25 years ago, no scientist would have thought that at this point we would have melted most of the summer sea ice in the Arctic. They would have said that's still 50 or 75 years off. No one would even bother to have been really measuring the pH of the oceans because we didn't think that we could substantially alter something that vast. Certainly no one would have worried that, as we learned about a year ago, the West Antarctic ice sheet seems now to be fundamentally destabilized and beginning its slide into the Southern Ocean. And I think no one would have guessed the degree to which we've seen perturbations of the hydrological cycle, the way that water moves around the planet. Since warm air holds more water vapor than cold, arid areas tend to get more drought. Since the water vapor, once it's evaporated into the atmosphere, only resides there on average about 7 days, we also get way more precipitation, often in the form of downpour. So drought flood cycles are much more pronounced. These are what happens in the early stages of climate change. So far, we've raised the temperature 1 degree Celsius. The same scientists who predicted what would happen so far tell us we're now on a track for 4 or 5 degrees before the century is out. If that's true, if we let that happen, if we don't divert course quickly, that's far more temperature rise than we can cope with. There's no reason to think we can have civilizations that resemble the ones we're used to at those temperatures. Among other things, growing food becomes a very difficult proposition.
Well, Bill, I've heard some people say growing food just moves north, and it's that simple. What's the alternative view of that?
Well, the alternative view looks at things like soil. Yes, it's true that at a certain point, the temperature regime that's been in Iowa will mean Siberia, but that doesn't help you much if you're, got tundra and muskeg that you're trying to grow your corn on. So that kind of glib thinking kind of marked some of the early discussions 20 years ago or so of climate change. There'd be winners and losers and things like that. At this point, I think the scientific view is pretty clear that we're all the biggest losers, of course, are those who have done the least to contribute to this problem, but live in those places in the developing world that are most exquisitely vulnerable to these changes. And they're already seeing them on a gross level. I mean, in May, we had the second deadliest heat wave in Indian history. In June, we had the deadliest heat wave in Pakistani history. This is just the kind of thing that's happening now someplace around the world every day.
Bill, I called this a climate change movement in the opening piece. Is that really the right word? As I listen to you talk, it's clear that the scope and the scale of what's happening is truly global. The West Larsen ice sheet going down is many gigatons of ice in movement, and yet we find that places like India are saying that it's their turn at developing, and if they need to burn coal to get electrification to their people, that's what they're going to do. Is movement the right word, or what is it that we're really needing to do, and what are we facing here?
Well, the first thing I'd say is differentiate between governments and people. There's a strong movement in India to keep them from digging up their coal and burning it, and it's coming from Indians. And there's a strong move to push them in the direction of going quickly to renewable energy. It seems to be maybe starting to work. Earlier this month, Adani, the great billionaire coal entrepreneur of India, began to hint that they were going to scrap their plans for building the largest coal mine on Earth in Queensland in Australia, primarily for export to India. So things are starting to shift even there. That exemplifies, I think, the kind of movement that has emerged around the world. It's a global fossil fuel resistance, I think you might say, active everywhere. So, climate scientists in the U.S. and elsewhere have brought to light, say, the danger posed by that huge coal mine in the Galilee Basin in Australia. We've worked with people around the world to make sure that no banks agree to finance that plan. Most of the world's big banks have announced they won't. Meanwhile, the 350.org crew from the Pacific Islands that are threatened by the rise of the oceans launched canoes from 12 nations last fall and took them to Newcastle in Australia, the biggest port in the world, and blockaded the coal ships for a day. That was right before the Queensland election. It turned out the Conservative government that was backing this coal mine plan. Meanwhile, our friends in India are hard at work drawing attention not only to climate change, but to the fact that fossil fuel combustion is killing millions of people every year through what's now the worst air pollution in the world. So you get some sense of how this sprawling fossil fuel resistance works. And it's good that it works that way because the fossil fuel industry itself is spread out in the same kind of sprawling manner.
Well, excellent. And this gets right to what I consider the heart of the matter. We study energy quite a lot at Peak Prosperity, and particularly the role of energy in feeding us and giving us the lifestyles that people think we deserve and are accustomed to. And you're familiar with this data as well, that anywhere from 10 to maybe 19 calories fossil fuels are sort of embedded and subsidized in a single calorie of food. So we are literally eating fossil fuels in one respect. And so what I'm wondering is if I could get your comments on a quote I have here. Maybe you're familiar with it. It's from Terry Leahy in an article titled "Checkmate: Why Capitalism Cannot Survive Global Warming." And the quote is, There is nothing about the switch to green energy that remotely resembles, and I have to paraphrase here, the rise of increasing productivity and economies of scale that followed globalization. It's all about substituting cheap ways of producing useful energy with more expensive ways of producing the same energy. It is a retooling to a lower level of productivity and to a permanent cap on energy production. It is this simple fact that explains why the capitalist class is dragging its heels in this issue in a way that threatens our future survival. And so what I want to get at here is there a fundamental disconnect between capitalism, or what we call capitalism, and the mandates of responding to climate change?
I don't know. I don't even really know what exactly one means. I mean, it's clear to me that we're going to have markets going on into the future, and it's clear to me that the kind of alternatives that people have advanced in the past, a kind of collective planning that you saw in the Soviet Union or something, aren't very good models for dealing with where we are. It's also true that kind of laissez-faire capitalism is not doing the job. The temperature is going up and up and up. So my guess is that we're going to see a rise of distributed energy, solar and wind being the best examples, that's going to have interesting effects in all kinds of ways, one of which a more democratic economy than the one we have now, because it won't be as dependent on those people in those places who happen to sit on top of coal and oil and gas. It's a different world when we can meet most of our needs for energy close to home. And you can see some of the same things starting to happen, with food, as the rise of the local food movement in the last 20 years gets underway. The energy future we're hoping for, I think, is a kind of farmer's market in electrons, millions of solar rooftops connected to each other in a grid, for instance. We have for that, right here on the internet that we're using to talk to each other. 30 years ago, the information system looked a lot like the energy system does now. A few big providers pushing stuff out at us who just had to kind of take it, the same way there were a few big power plants now. But that's not how our information system works anymore. We're all both producers and consumers, and it shouldn't be how our energy system works either.
Now, leaving aside transportation fuels, which is a whole topic, I'm very interested in the role that alternative energies can play, and here's my view on this, Bill. I have solar thermal on my roof. It was one of the first things I put in because it's just a no-brainer. The sun heats stuff up beautifully, and so getting hot water from the sun is something that whenever I travel, I look to see who else is doing it, because in the United States it's pretty rare. Far less than 1% of the rooftops. But you go to some countries, they're everywhere. It just makes good sense. So what I'm getting at here is, for me, solar thermal technology, it's not sexy. It's 1970s. It's a bunch of pipes and an empty black box on your roof with fluid running through it and a little circulating pump. That's it. It makes economic sense. If you care about not burning fossil fuels to heat water, it makes sense on that environmental front. It makes sense if you like local jobs. It makes sense, Bill, on every front I can find, and we still don't do it. Isn't that really at the heart of this battle, is that there are things we could do, but we're not for some reason? And I'm wondering what your views are on why not.
Sure, and I've been writing about solar thermal for a long time. I agree with you. It's an obvious choice. We need to get in place, and I think we're finally starting to, some of the things like the financing and the coordination and stuff to make these things easy for people to do. That's what's happened in those countries that have taken full advantage of them. I remember interviewing the Huang Ming, who runs the biggest of the Chinese solar thermal companies, became a billionaire several times over. And he was a good engineer, but as he said, the real innovation they had was the kind of marketing of these things, figuring out how to get them up on people's houses for, no money down and so on and so forth. And we're beginning to see those models start to emerge finally in this country, the leasing models for solar PV. seem to be having a real impact in terms of spreading that at a whole different amplitude than we'd seen before. But it's those, so what they call the soft costs that are at least as difficult to deal with as the engineering.
And if we had those financing models, I agree that would be part of it. To me, it's almost like we need a new narrative first. So people don't do it primarily because other people aren't doing it yet, or something. Or there's a narrative that's been running since probably February 2013. I've been watching this narrative, I think put out by the American Petroleum Institute, that the United States has hundreds of years of natural gas and we're the new Saudi Arabia and all of that. So that to me serves to blunt any people's sense of urgency or need to do something different. I'd like to turn now to maybe those what are we up against here, and who really is who's got a dog in this fight? Because I'll tell you, I'm sure you know this way better than me, the people who want to see that we continue to frack and drill our way to some sort of future, have been running a very, very well-funded campaign, at least as far as I've noticed.
Yeah, well, look, the fossil fuel industry is the richest industry on Earth. I just have a piece in the New Yorker last week explaining how they're working hard to keep solar stuff from happening utility by utility. There's a lot of dark money flowing in to try and blunt the rise of solar. This is true. This is I think, probably did, and no use whining about it. What we need to do is organize. We'll never outspend the fossil fuel industry, but we have other currencies we can work in, and those are the currencies of movements: passion, spirit, creativity. So that's what we try to do. That's why we put people in the streets. That's why we go to jail. That's why we do those kind of things.
Well, let's talk about those actions then, because I'm very interested in what it takes to create a movement and what it takes to really affect change. And I'll let out my personal bias or cynicism in this, is that the pace and the scale of the changes I see coming are overwhelming our ability to organize. That's how I feel about it, and perhaps that's because I'm not as tightly enmeshed in it, but that's what I see coming economically, on the energy front, environmentally, all of that. It's really fast and powerful. So how do we effectively mobilize? What do you think the halls of power really are listening to at this point in time? And again, noting that every single change to status quo in our country's history was brought kicking and screaming from the outside in, right? Everything: labor rights, women's rights, civil rights, you name it, right? So how where are we in this large story of let's say, altering the status quo in this country? Are things easier, harder, or what works?
So normally politicians listen to money. I mean, on any given day, left to its own devices, that's what wins. But then in rare cases, people do, as you say, rise up. And we see examples of it even in the news the last couple of weeks. The gay marriage movement did such a good job that now most sane politicians have gone from being against it to being for it, not because they've changed their minds about the issue, because the political calculus changed, because there was enough of a movement that it changed the zeitgeist. What activists really work for is to change the zeitgeist. And there are lots of ways of doing that. One of the things that's helping change the zeitgeist is the fact that the cost of renewable energy is plummeting downward. That's good news, and we, all credit to the engineers. Another thing that's happening is that resistance to every new fossil fuel plan, from Keystone Pipeline to fracking to coal mines to coal export terminals to whatever, is making the life of the fossil industry more expensive. We're imposing with our bodies some of the carbon tax that we can't impose legislatively because of the power of the fossil fuel industry. There's the huge fight around divestment that's beginning to sap the ability of the fossil fuel industry to raise new capital. It's all helping. And whether or not it'll happen in time, I don't know. I mean, because as you're aware, with climate change, this is not a static target. It's really the first social movement where we've absolutely had to get a goal accomplished in short order. And if we can't, then it becomes moot.
Well, it does become moot, and there are a number of people out there, scientists among them, who've said we've already lost the battle. Climate change is, I mean, certainly we've lost the 1 degree, and I think 2 degrees is baked in the cake. But the question now, I guess, is we're fighting over how much beyond that we go. Is that accurate?
Oh, well, sure. I mean, it's, we're on track. I mean, even if we do everything right at this point, it's going to be hard to stop the rise of temperature below 2 degrees, although God knows we're going to try. But at the moment, we're sort of, if you follow the business plans of the fossil fuel industry, they've got enough carbon in their reserves to double that, triple that. So, left to their own devices, that's what will happen. So that's our job, is to bring them to heel. And it's not an easy one. They've got tons of money. We may not be able to do it. But the good news is that a movement has really arisen. And it's in the streets more and more and more.
Well, I want to talk about where that movement begins. One of the things that we advocate very heavily at Peak Prosperity is that we have to become the change we wish to see. And for me, that means understanding, analyzing my energy use, and then figuring out how to dial it back. And it takes effort. And it's not as easy as just turning on light switches and filling up fuel and all of that. What I'm interested in is your views on, let's assume that hypothetically tonight the world gets complete religion on climate change and says, wow, we have to treat this with real seriousness. We're going to I don't know what. We're going to dedicate our entire military budgets, pour it over this direction. It'll be like a Manhattan Project times an Apollo project times a number. We get serious about it. What would that really imply? What would we do if we were serious?
Well, we'd treat it the way we did the beginning of World War II. We would mobilize the world's industrial might to get done, and we'd take every tool we could, like a serious and rising price on carbon, to make that happen. The tools really are less in question, I think, than the motivation to get there. I mean, every economist for 25 years has said we need a price on carbon. We know how to do it. People have talked a lot about the fee and dividend plans and things like that. But all of this is, just talk until there's the political will to make it happen. That's what we've got to, I think that's job one. That's why we organize the way we do. And my house is covered with solar panels, and I drove the first, hybrid electric Ford in Vermont, and, on and on and on. I try not to fool myself that that's how we're going to win this fight. Global warming is a structural and systemic issue. That's where it comes from. Structures and systems. And so changing those is what's key. As individuals, we're relatively powerless against climate change. That's why the most important thing an individual can do is not be an individual, but to join with other people in this battle.
All right. And in this joining, is this you're thinking of a movement where we're trying to affect political change, and more importantly, I guess, it's that political change follows the social change. So where are we on that front? What have you found that really works to help sway people towards this new future that we'd like to inhabit?
People move for different reasons and in different ways. The rise of the solar panel as a workable technology is a good thing because everyone likes solar panels, left, right, and center. There's a big coalition emerging in this country of Tea Party activists and Sierra Club members working together to make it easy for people to put solar on their roof. Other people are, understand, and increasingly this is true of faith groups and things, understand the social justice dimensions of this work, and they're motivated by a desire to help people out of the single most impoverishing thing we've probably ever done, which is change the climate on which their daily stability depends. Other people really are motivated by thinking about the future. This is the first truly intergenerational problem we've run up against. And so it's causing new ways of ethical reasoning and consideration. There's so many kind of routes into this work. Others just think, hey, this is the next great economic tool we've got. I want the jobs that come from putting solar panels on the roof of everything that faces south in the United States.
Yeah, I've when I look at the data, grossly speaking here, about a quarter of our energy use is for electricity. We can solve that in many of the ways that with the alternative energies that you're talking about. About a quarter is moving ourselves around, goes into our gas tanks, and about half is actually in buildings themselves and their heating and cooling costs over time. And so when I look at that, I note, Bill, that still the houses that are being sort of slapped up around my neighborhood are, for the most part, being done with what I'll call old school. Some of them have maybe 2x6 construction, but they're still not doing our 40-60 kind of construction. And it seems to me like that when we talk about the jobs and the opportunities, there's going to be a huge set of opportunities if we get serious, when we get serious about this, just in doing the simple things like re-insulating, or when we do building with much higher degrees of air tightness and insulating quality and all of that. That
this was the point of this piece I had in the New Yorker at the end of June. You're absolutely right. There's, the housing stock of this country is mostly older, and it needs to be fixed. And that's good news, because no one's going to put their house on a boat and send it to China to get it insulated. That's work that has to be done here close to home, and it's good work, and we can do it. The question is whether we'll evolve the series of kind of institutions and practices to really make it possible. I think those have more to do with financing than anything else. And it should be possible. Look, you can estimate pretty well how much money someone's going to save from putting in good insulation and good windows and whatever else. That should provide the capital flow to make it possible to do this sort of work. And increasingly, people are getting more sophisticated about how to bundle those projects in ways that make them easier to attract financing and so on and so forth.
It's interesting. I nose around in real estate all the time, just looking. I don't remember running across a real estate website that, among all the things that will list your cost of ownership, seeing a line in there that says, here's your monthly heating and cooling cost. I mean, you can ask for and get that information, I guess, but it's not yet front and center. Like when somebody's deciding, hey, I'm going to buy something I might own for 30 years, tell me what it's going to run me. And, you run through the usual stuff. What's your taxes and, your insurance and things like that. But the heating and cooling costs, it turns out, for commercial buildings can be upwards of 70% of their total lifespan cost. And still, I don't really see that being front and center yet.
It should be, but that number, that 70% number, is a good reminder of just how much money there's going to be saved. And the money that we can save on energy is what will finance this revolution, right? Mm-hmm.
So fantastic. So what I love is there's lots of things that can be done. And what I'm interested in then is so what would you suggest listeners to this? What should they be doing right now?
Well, I mean, you be working close to home. That's a good thing to be doing on your own home. But, in your community, we're all sort of responsible for that. But you got to save some energy to work at the national and global level, too, because it's the structures and systems in which we're embedded that make the choices so much more constrained close to home. So hook up with an outfit like 350.org or the Sierra Club or, whoever it is that's working hard, NRDC, Greenpeace, that is sort of working on a national and international level to try and take on the roots of this problem as well. And those things coexist rather nicely, I think. It's why we've set up 350.org the way we have, as a kind of loose, sprawling coalition of people all over the world. And we work in every country except North Korea, and we can tell you the issues are overlap around the planet.
And how many people would you guess are involved in that?
I have no good idea.
All right.
Millions upon millions.
Millions upon millions. Great. So it's a good big organization. So I want to thank you so much for your time today. I'm wondering if you could please tell our listeners about any important events coming up they should know about, or writings of yours, where they would find those, and your website.
Oh, well, you can find my books in library, and there's a list of them at billmckibben.com. But the real place to go is 350.org. And once you sign up, just give them your name, and they'll keep you well posted on everything that's going on in your community, in your nation, and on this particular planet where we happen to live, as we're dealing with this biggest crisis that we've ever had.
And it's a big crisis with lots of things that we can and should be doing that make all kinds of sense. We just have to change how we approach things, right?
Yes, that's true. But we also have to work hard on human solidarity in ways that we haven't in the past, because we have a great obligation and debt to the rest of the planet who we've put in peril with our couple of centuries of burning fossil fuel. So you got to think about others too. Self-interest and were a good motivator, but I was awfully glad to see the Pope raise the most important stakes in all of this earlier this spring.
Oh, wasn't that fantastic? His encyclical was was wonderful. I'm not religious and I'm not Catholic, but this Pope has really caught my attention. I really admire him tremendously at this stage.
That makes two of us.
So again, thank you so much for your time today, and all the best. And we will certainly be doing our part to figure out what this new narrative is, because it's time for a new story. Humans have clearly outlived the past story, which was we're going to grow into every crevice of the planet. Great, did it. The question is now what? And thank you so much for your work in helping to answer that question.
Back at you. You guys do great work, and we're really grateful for it. Take care, man.
Thank you. Bye-bye.